It's good to see all of you. Today is many things, including in America, the 4th of July. But we are all over the world. Catherine's in Australia. Fabrice, I think I saw you in France. We have Valerie in Tel Aviv. David, who lives in Israel. We have friends and family all over the world. And I want to make sure that we pay close attention to what today means in all of these directions and that we ground it in Torah. That has been a very important commitment we have made for 4.5 years, every single weekday morning. And so let's not break our tradition. Let's start with Torah and then make our way into the meaning perhaps of the day, and let's talk about this. In our Parsha, Parshat Korach, we have the rebellion that we've spoken about now a couple of times over this week. Led by Korach, he recruits Datan and Aviram, and they recruit 250 leaders of the Israelites to stage a rebellion, an attempted coup over not just Moses and Aaron, but with the order that God has set in place. Now, that's really important. The authority that Moshe and Aharon wield is not their own, nor did they seek the power that they wield. Moshe tried to evade God's call, and Aaron was called as a last ditch attempt by God, or last chance for Moshe, really, um, to fulfill this work with Aaron serving as spokesperson, Navi. Now, that's an important place to begin because the power that any leader wields is not their own. There were ancient societies in the world, and even modern ones that have the vestiges of it, like Japan with the idea of an emperor, or in the ancient world with the leader serving in place of God. And that was a classic understanding of the role of leader. Egypt represented that too, which is why when God calls Moshe, God says, I will make you a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron will be your prophet. So the prophet is the voice of God, just as the ruler is supposed to be the incarnation of God. The modern Catholic Church has a version of this in the role of the Pope. Now, all of this being said, what I wanted to focus on was not the authority that the leaders wield, but with the ritual with which they were tested. In our Parsha, when Korach and the rebellion challenge Moses and Aaron, there is a test that is put in place. They're each going to take their incense pans, their fire pans, and offer an incense sacrifice to God. And whoever's is accepted will be seen by the people, and that is the big point of this, a huge public spectacle, as the rightful leaders. It's interesting how much perception plays into this moment, and we can talk another time about the role of perception when it comes to appropriate wielding of power and authority. It's a big conversation. But in this moment, when they bring the fire pans forward, Moses and Aaron's sacrifices are accepted. But then, when Korach's followers offer their fire pans, a divine fire consumes the rebels. And then afterwards, the fire pans that were used by the rebels, we are instructed in the Torah that they should be melted down and serve as a covering for the Mizbeach, for the altar. Think about what this means. That in order for us to serve God from that point on, we need to remember this significant challenge to the role of our leaders. I'm going to read a comment here that is recorded by Rabbi Charlie Schwartz, and he is recording a comment by Nechama Leibovitz, one of the great Torah scholars and teachers of the 20th century. Yes, actually, Valerie, as you said, upcycling for sure. So this is what Rabbi Schwartz writes, quoting Nechama Leibovitz. Nechama Leibovitz, drawing on the medieval commentator Ramban, writes in response to this strange thing, that the covering of the altar is now going to be made with the reconstituted fire pans of the rebels. She writes, the holiness of the vessels did not originate in the actions of those who sinned, but God had them sanctified to serve as a lesson to the people. The holiness of the items was not from the rebels, but with the purpose. Listen to what Rabbi Schwartz continues to say. That is, it was God, not Korach and his followers, who transformed the fire pans into vessels suitable for divine service. The plating of the altar with the pans then represents the return of ritual order and the ending of the chaos. Now, let me turn to today. American history is replete with chaos, in fact. We see it as order, we see it as valorous and noble. And my father um, always imbued in me pride in our country. His father, my grandfather of blessed memory, Henry Creditor, served in the army during World War II, stationed in the Philippines, almost was part of a ground invasion of Japan before the United States dropped atomic bombs on Japan. And my sister, today, my amazing sister, serves as a chaplain in the US Navy. My pride in our country is both based in the service that my family has shown, the safe shores that we have found, as I'm a fourth generation and third generation American, um, but also the complexity of our history as a country challenges that pride. Today is the 4th of July, the day in 1776 when we, as a country, ratified the Declaration of Independence, seceding, as it were, from England. Now, how history judges that moment is fascinating. Much has been written, much will be written. And how we look at the leaders who articulated these principles, who fought over these principles, is also very important, because you might know that the battles between the founders never really resolved. Who actually wields the authority of this nation? Is it the states? Is it the federal government? You have different articulations of these ideas, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson in particular. This is important. I remember as a young Jew here in America having the debate over and over, are you a Jewish American or an American Jew? Where does the adjective live? What is the noun? What is the primary? I remember being very passionate about this. This past year, and the way anti-Semitism has risen in America, along with so much political chaos, it's all connected, reminded me, especially in the aftermath of October 7th, that Jews around the world are one. That is the noun, and everything else is an adjective. The assumption that American can be the noun for a Jew is a very radical idea given our history. And so, in the way that we look at our own belonging, and in the way that we look at American history, there is much that connects to this Torah portion. What makes the founding document of this country, the United States, holy? I mean, some people believe that it is. There's a wonderful book I have on my shelves called American Scripture, where the eventual reverence with which the founding documents have now been treated evolved over time. But this experiment was a commercial experiment, a trade experiment. Nation states are very much based on economies, which is why Hamilton and Jefferson were as passionate as they were. Who owns the rights to our labor? Who owns the rights to what we do? Who owns our work? To whom do we pay our taxes? Well, that's not the question for a Jew. The question for a Jew is, where can I be free and safe and raise my children so that we can be part of building this world from love? That's the Jewish question. Korach and his rebels sought power, but the purpose was not pure. The purpose was not for the use of the fire pans in service the way that they were designed to be used. And in fact, the incorporation of what they did into the essential service on the altar is a very big lesson for us to consider. Because we have to absorb the complicated parts of our history. I'll speak as an American right now, as an American Jew, since I've resolved that passionate debate of my childhood. To absorb the complicated parts of our narrative, the sins that have been part of American history, beginning with the original sin of displacing people who lived here, when white colonialists arrived. The massacring of countless thousands of people who had already been here, and the importing of human beings as if they were chattel. The sin of slavery is a continuation of dehumanization that American philosophers have always absorbed into something called manifest destiny, which is this is what God intended. But how dare anyone, including American ancestors or anyone, assume that it is God's will that some people succeed at the expense of others? We know that every sin is not lost. That tshuva, the Jewish notion of atonement, doesn't mean that we erase the sins. We don't absolve anyone of sins. In Jewish tradition, we say, here is our opportunity. This is Maimonides' phrasing, by the way. I'm in the same situation again. What do I do this time? When presented with the same circumstances, will we sin again? Well, the fire pans melted down and placed as the plating of the altar is one way of making sure we never forget. So too is learning our history. And so what I wanted to offer, not as the center of our Torah learning, but as a very important connected voice, is the end of one book and the beginning of another. I want to recommend very highly one of my favorite books on American history called American Creation by Joseph Ellis. Triumphs and Tragedies at the Founding of the Republic. And American Creation begins with Joseph Ellis, one of the most incredible historians of American history, speaking about how the founders of the United States were not demigods. They didn't surpass their humanity to create this nation. They were human beings who improvised the best they could. And among the things they were able to accomplish was to create, he says, an explosion in slow motion, was to do something creative without destroying. That is a lesson in leadership that is worth emulating, even if not everything they did is worth emulating. And I want to quote from the end of this book, and then I'll quote from the beginning of another. So this is in the afterword by Ellis. He talks about how important space and time are as part of the American project. He writes, equally creative, though not so much a decision as the realization that one was not necessary, was the willingness to blur the question of political sovereignty. Who's in charge, the federal government or the states? The unresolvable issue of the founding era was federal versus state sovereignty. Any effort to enforce an unambiguous answer to that question would probably have killed the infant American Republic in the cradle, by which he means, if I think that my truth is the only truth, I will destroy. And we watch, friends, we watch as some political leaders act in this way. I don't mean one person. I mean the idea that my truth matters more than your life. That's why people get guns. He wrote, the founding succeeded in the elemental sense that the American Republic survived its most vulnerable phase of development. Against all odds, the most liberal nation state in the history of Western civilization was now firmly embedded in the most extensive and richly endowed plot of ground on the planet. The political shape of the emerging American nation was a more human creation, flawed as all human creations must be, most notably in its prevailing racial prejudice and its inability to envision the multicultural idea we now take for granted. Just a little bit more. But the design of the political foundation was ingenious in its combination of stability and agility, most especially in its prudent placement of an expanding liberal mandate at the start that left room up ahead for an Abraham Lincoln and a Martin Luther King to join the list of founders. In that sense, perhaps the most creative act of the founding era was to make time as well as space an indispensable ally, in effect extending the founding moment everlastingly into the future. Isn't that beautiful? To understand the founding of America as ongoing. We haven't yet finished that founding. Let me close with the beginning of one of my favorite books, American Judaism, by the Jewish historian Jonathan Sarna, who was actually my father's counselor at Camp Ramah many, many years ago. So he published this volume on the 350th anniversary of American Jewish life, when the first Jew arrived on these shores, at least that we know of. Listen to how he closes his introduction. To study the history of American Judaism is, among many other things, to be reminded anew of the theme of human potential. In our case, the ability of American Jews, young and old, men and women alike, to change the course of history and transform a piece of their world. This volume, this beautiful book, this volume is not just a record of events, it is the story of how people shaped events, establishing and maintaining communities, responding to challenges, working for change. That perhaps is the greatest lesson that I can offer readers, the knowledge that they too can make a difference, that the future is theirs to create. In both of these books, friends, in American Judaism and American Creation, both tellings of American history, but one through a Jewish lens, tells us that the Jewish contribution to the United States, or really any place we've ever tried to call home, is the reminder that we are not done with the work of founding this place. That justice is a process and authority needs to be ethically wielded, and that we have to have faith in the capacity of society to grow, to heal, and to do better. We are creators. That's what it is to be a human being, and Judaism's language for that is clear. Here we are in a moment of history, but we know, even our name for God tells us, the four-letter name of God that we do not pronounce, contains in it Haya, was, Hoveh is, Yihiyeh will be. We don't say that name, we absorb it. That essence of God is in the human spirit, remembering that there is a future that we are supposed to build now. We are supposed to wield authority ethically, and we need to build society out of ethical decisions, one at a time, knowing that at some point in history, our descendants will look back and say, if only they knew what we know now. I can't believe the mistake they made in 2024, but maybe we'll do better this time. Well, it is our job as the descendants of our ancestors and the ancestors of our descendants to make a better decision based on all the learning and acting and believing we can do. No place is perfect and no place is fully cooked. The mistakes of the past are baked into the lessons we need in order to serve. That's what the fire pans of Korach on the altar always teach. So here we are, friends, and it's our job to move the needle towards justice, towards real freedom. The 4th of July is not a date from 1776. It is today. And the sacrifices of our ancestors got us here. What are we willing to do so that our children will be blessed to say the same? That's what we are called to do today. It's the purpose of freedom. One of the things we do, friends, is that we don't leave anyone behind. I know my noun. I'm a Jew. My family's hurting. So I sing. So I pray. So I mobilize. So I vote. So I act. So I call out. It's what we do. It's what we do. It's what our ancestors did too. So, friends, send your heart east on this 272nd day that our family was hurt and is still hurting and is healing and is heroic. Let's remind all of our family members they're not alone. Let's remind ourselves that too. Kol hon balevav pnima nefesh Yehudi hombia ulefate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia od lo avda tikvatenu התקווה בת שנות 2000 להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון וירושלים להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ Zion Virushalayim. Bring them home now. Am Yisrael Chai. See you tomorrow, friends. Take care.